The night sky over Rawhide, Nevada, was ablaze with stars when Thomas Murphy first saw her, a silhouette against the backdrop of the saloon's flickering lanterns, her hands trembling as she clutched a worn leather satchel. It was 1878, and like many western towns, Rawhide had seen its share of desperate souls, but something about her stillness amid the chaos of Saturday night revelry caught his attention from across the dusty street. Thomas adjusted his Stetson, the brim casting a shadow over his weathered face. At 32, he'd lived enough to recognize someone running from something. He watched as she stepped back when a group of miners burst through the saloon doors, laughing and shouting. Her reaction was instinctive, a flinch that spoke volumes. He hadn't planned on approaching her. Rawhide was just another stop on his cattle drive to California, a place to rest before moving the herd west. But when she stumbled, nearly collapsing against the hitching post, something pulled him forward through the evening air. "Madam," he called softly, keeping his distance. "You look like you could use some help." She startled, eyes wide and wary beneath the dim glow of the lanterns. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied, but her voice cracked with the lie. "Name's Thomas Murphy," he said, stopping several feet away. "Most folks call me Tom. I don't mean to intrude, but there's a decent boarding house down the street if you need a place to stay. Mrs. Holloway runs it, good woman, fair prices." The stranger hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to another. Thomas noticed her boots were expensive once but now worn through at the sides. Her dress was similarly fine but travel-stained and torn at the hem. "Jane," she finally offered. "Jane Nichols." "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Nichols," Thomas said with a slight nod. "Are you meeting someone in Rawhide?" Jane glanced nervously over her shoulder. "No, I'm just passing through." Her knuckles whitened around the handle of her satchel. Before Thomas could respond, a commotion erupted from the saloon. 3 men burst out onto the boardwalk, their voices raised in anger. Jane's face drained of color as she pressed herself against the wall of the building. "I believe I will take your suggestion about the boarding house," she whispered urgently. Thomas assessed the situation quickly. The men weren't looking their way, but Jane's reaction told him enough. "Follow me," he said quietly. "Stay close." He led her down a side alley away from the main street. Jane followed without question, her footsteps quick and light behind him. They emerged onto a quieter street lined with modest houses, a church at one end and the promised boarding house at the other. "Mrs. Holloway keeps a clean place," Thomas explained as they approached the 2-story building with its neat white curtains. "No questions asked as long as you pay in advance." Jane nodded, reaching into a hidden pocket in her skirt. "I have money." "I'll wait until you're settled. Make sure there's no trouble." Her eyes met his then, truly studying him for the first time. "Why would you help a stranger?" Thomas shrugged. "My mother raised me to believe that kindness costs nothing but means everything." Something in her expression softened just slightly. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," he agreed simply. Mrs. Holloway answered the door on the second knock, her gray hair tucked neatly beneath a nightcap. She eyed them both critically before breaking into a warm smile at the sight of Thomas. "Mr. Murphy. Didn't expect to see you until you brought your herd through. What brings you to my door at this hour?" "Evening, Mrs. Holloway. This is Miss Nichols. She's in need of a room for the night." The older woman's gaze shifted to Jane, taking in her appearance with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Of course. I've got a nice room at the back. Quiet. $2 for the night, includes breakfast." Jane counted out the money with steady fingers that belied her earlier trembling. "Thank you." Mrs. Holloway pocketed the coins. "Follow me, dear, I'll show you up." Jane turned to Thomas. "Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I appreciate your kindness." He tipped his hat. "Get some rest, Miss Nichols. Rawhide's a decent town despite first appearances." She gave him a ghost of a smile before following Mrs. Holloway inside, the door closing firmly behind her. Thomas stood for a moment in the cool night air, staring at the closed door. Something about Jane Nichols stirred his protective instincts. He'd seen fear before in the eyes of soldiers during the war, in cattle facing slaughter, in green cowboys during their first stampede, but hers was different. It was the fear of someone who'd seen the worst of humanity and expected to see it again at any moment. He shook his head and turned back toward the livery where he'd left his horse. His foreman, Eddie Wilkins, could handle the cattle for another day or two. Thomas had planned to stay in town briefly to negotiate passage rights through a stretch of difficult terrain ahead. But now, he felt an unexpected reluctance to leave. As he walked, he glanced back at the boarding house, noticing a shadow in the upper window. Jane, looking out at the night, her silhouette rigid with vigilance. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the desert air crisp with the promise of heat to come. Thomas met with the local landowner, securing permission to drive his cattle across a crucial stretch of land with good water access. Business concluded more quickly than expected. He found himself with time to spare before rejoining his herd. His boots carried him back to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house almost of their own accord. He told himself he was simply checking on the stranger he'd helped, making sure she'd settled in all right. Mrs. Holloway was sweeping the front porch when he arrived. "She's around back," the woman said without preamble, gesturing with her broom. "Garden, looking pale as a ghost this morning, barely touched my flapjacks." She clucked her tongue. "That girl's carrying troubles, Mr. Murphy." "Seems that way," he agreed, circling around to the small garden behind the house. Jane sat on a weathered bench beneath an apple tree, staring at nothing. In the daylight, Thomas could see her more clearly, chestnut hair pulled back in a simple knot, skin fair but sunburned across her nose and cheeks, suggesting recent time outdoors. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25 or so, and there was a delicate quality to her features that spoke of genteel upbringing. She didn't notice him until he deliberately scuffed his boot against the ground. Her head snapped up, hand flying to her throat before recognition dawned. "Mr. Murphy. Miss Nichols. Thought I'd check in, see if you needed anything." She smoothed her skirts, composing herself. "That's very kind but unnecessary. I'm quite capable of looking after myself." Thomas nodded. "Never doubted it. Just offering neighborly assistance in a strange town." Jane studied him, wariness battling with something that might have been loneliness in her eyes. "Do you live in Rawhide?" "No, madam. Just passing through with a herd of cattle, heading to California." "You're a cowboy, then?" It wasn't a question, but there was no disdain in her voice, just simple assessment. "Trail boss," he corrected with a slight smile. "Got 20 men and 2,000 head of cattle camped about 10 miles east." She glanced toward the horizon as if she might see this impressive caravan. "That sounds peaceful in its way." Thomas couldn't help the laugh that escaped him. Peaceful isn't the word most would use. Dusty, dangerous, exhausting, those come to mind first. A small smile curved her lips, the first genuine one he'd seen. "Yet you do it. It's a living. A good one if you don't mind hard work and sleeping under stars." He paused, then ventured cautiously, "What about you, Miss Nichols? What brings you to Rawhide alone?" The smile vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Opportunity," she said simply. "I heard there might be work here." It was an evasion, but Thomas didn't press. "Town's growing. The silver mine up north has brought in steady business. What kind of work are you looking for? I can teach." "Or keep books," she hesitated. "Or sew if necessary." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. The mercantile might need help. Owner's wife just had their 4th child. and the mining company office is always looking for folks who can handle figures. Thank you. I'll inquire today. Jane stood, straightening her shoulders. I should get started. Good day, Mr. Murphy. He recognized dismissal when he heard it, but something made him press on. I'm heading to the cafe for breakfast. Would you care to join me? The biscuits at Lottie's are worth the trip to Rawhide all on their own. Jane hesitated, one hand tight around the bench's edge. For a moment he thought she would refuse, but then she nodded. I would like that, thank you. They walked side by side down Rawhide's main street, an odd pair drawing curious glances. Thomas nodded to acquaintances but kept conversation light, sensing Jane's discomfort with attention. At Lottie's cafe, he secured a table by the window where Jane could sit with her back to the wall, a position that seemed to ease some of her tension. Lottie herself bustled over, her ample frame wrapped in a flour-dusted apron. Thomas Murphy, didn't expect to see you until next month. How's that ornery bunch of cowboys treating you? They keep me on my toes, Lottie, he replied with a grin. Miss Nichols, this is Lottie Wilson, best cook in 3 counties. Lottie, Miss Jane Nichols. Pleasure, Lottie said, giving Jane a warm smile. Any friend of Tom's is welcome here. What'll you have? Biscuits just came out of the oven. They ordered, and when Lottie departed, Thomas leaned back in his chair, casually surveying the room. So, teaching, he said, returning to their earlier conversation. Where did you teach before? Jane tensed. Boston, originally, then St. Louis, long way from home. Home is a relative concept, Mr. Murphy, he nodded, recognizing the boundary she was setting. True enough. I haven't called anywhere home since Virginia before the war. Her eyes flickered with interest. You fought Confederate cavalry. Not something I'm particularly proud of these days, but I was young and fool-headed. He shrugged. The West offered a fresh start. No one much cares which side you fought for when you're facing a stampede or a drought. Jane's hands wrapped around her coffee cup. A fresh start, she repeated softly. That's what I'm seeking as well. Before he could respond, the cafe door banged open. 3 men entered, trail dusty and loud. Jane's reaction was immediate. She froze, eyes fixed on her cup, body rigid. Thomas turned slightly, assessing the newcomers with a practiced eye. Trail hands by the look of them, probably from one of the outfits passing through. Friends of yours? He asked quietly. Jane shook her head minutely. No, I just don't care for loud disruptions. It was more than that, but Thomas didn't challenge her. Instead, he shifted his chair slightly, positioning himself to block her from the men's line of sight. Tell me about Boston, he suggested, deliberately changing the subject. Never been east of the Mississippi myself. Gradually, as the men settled at a distant table, Jane relaxed enough to speak. She described cobblestone streets and grand libraries, theaters and lecture halls. Her knowledge and passion for literature revealed itself as she spoke of favorite authors Emerson, Thoreau, Austen, the Brontes. You've had quite an education, Thomas observed. My father believed in education for women, she replied. He taught at Harvard before he died. I'm sorry for your loss, she nodded, a shadow crossing her face. It was some years ago now. Their conversation continued, careful but increasingly comfortable. Thomas found himself charmed by her quick mind and the occasional glimpses of dry humor that emerged when she momentarily forgot her caution. In turn, he shared stories of cattle drives and frontier towns, the characters he'd met and landscapes he'd crossed. By the time they finished eating, the 3 men had departed, and Jane had agreed to let Thomas accompany her to the mercantile to inquire about work. To his surprise, the owner, Harold Jenkins, was indeed looking for help, his wife overwhelmed with their newborn. Can you start tomorrow? Jenkins asked after a brief interview where Jane demonstrated her neat handwriting and quick calculations. 6 days a week, 8 to 6 with Sundays off. $5 a week, plus a 10% discount on goods. Yes, I can start tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Jane's relief was palpable. Outside, she turned to Thomas with genuine warmth. It seems I'm in your debt again, Mr. Murphy. Your suggestion was perfect. Just good luck, he demurred. Jenkins is fair. You'll do well there. They stood awkwardly for a moment, the natural conclusion of their time together approaching but neither quite ready to part. When do you leave for California? Jane finally asked. Day after tomorrow, most likely. Need to check on my men and the herd first, make sure everything's in order. She nodded, disappointment flickering briefly across her face. Well, thank you for your kindness. It's rare to find these days. Maybe I could call on you tomorrow evening. The words surprised Thomas almost as much as they seemed to surprise Jane. That is, if you're not too tired after your first day. Jane hesitated, her expression a complex mix of caution and something that might have been hope. I would like that, she said finally. Perhaps. Perhaps you could tell me more about California. It would be my pleasure, Miss Nichols. As promised, Thomas rode out to check on his cattle that afternoon. The herd was doing well, grazing on decent grass in a valley east of town. His foreman, Eddie, had everything under control but was clearly curious about his boss's extended stay in town. Found something interesting in Rawhide, have you? Eddie asked as they sat by the campfire that evening. Thomas poked at the flames with a stick. Someone, he admitted. A lady in need of some help. Eddie raised his eyebrows but knew better than to tease. In the 15 years they'd worked together, he'd never seen Thomas show more than passing interest in any woman. Must be quite a lady. She's different, Thomas said, unsure how to explain the pull he felt toward Jane. Educated. Been through something tough, I think, though she doesn't talk about it. Careful there, Eddie warned gently. Folks running from something often bring trouble with them. Thomas nodded, acknowledging the wisdom. I know. Just want to make sure she's settled before we move on. Eddie studied him over the rim of his coffee cup. You sure that's all it is? Thomas had no answer. He'd asked himself the same question repeatedly since meeting Jane Nichols. At 32, he'd long ago accepted that his life would be the trail, the cattle, the endless horizon. Women occasionally warmed his bed in trail towns, but none had ever tempted him to linger. Until now. The next evening found Thomas back in Rawhide, freshly shaved and wearing his least worn shirt. He'd left Eddie with instructions to prepare for departure the following day, ignoring his foreman's knowing smile. Jane was just leaving the mercantile when he arrived. Her face lit up at the sight of him, then quickly composed itself into a more reserved expression. Mr. Murphy, you came. Said I would, he replied simply. How was your first day? Busy but good. Mr. Jenkins is indeed fair, and Mrs. Jenkins brought the baby by. He's a beautiful child. A wistful note entered her voice. Thought we might have supper at the hotel, Thomas suggested. It's quieter than the cafe in the evenings. Jane agreed, and they walked toward the hotel at the end of the street. As they passed the saloon, Thomas felt her tense beside him. He followed her gaze to a man leaning against the hitching rail, smoking a cigar. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him. Medium height, neatly dressed in a dark suit, his face partially shadowed by his hat. Miss Nichols, Thomas murmured, noting her suddenly ashen complexion. She shook herself slightly. I'm fine, just thought I recognized someone. I was mistaken. Thomas wasn't convinced but didn't press. Instead, he gently guided her past the saloon, positioning himself between her and the stranger. The man paid them no attention, continuing to smoke and stare out at the street. At the hotel dining room, Thomas secured a corner table. Once seated, Jane seemed to relax gradually, though her eyes darted to the door whenever it opened. "Tell me about California," she requested, echoing her words from the previous day. "What's it like?" Thomas described the fertile valleys and towering mountains, the fog-shrouded coastline, and the bustling city of San Francisco. "It's a place of contradictions," he explained. "Refined society and rough mining camps within miles of each other, fortunes made and lost overnight." "It sounds wonderful," Jane said softly, "to be somewhere so new, somewhere you can reinvent yourself. Is that what you're hoping to do in Rawhide, reinvent yourself?" She traced the pattern on the tablecloth with one finger. "Perhaps, or just exist quietly for a while." Their conversation meandered through safer topics, books they'd read, places they'd seen, childhood memories Jane was willing to share. Thomas found himself laughing more than he had in years, drawn to her quick wit and the way her entire face transformed when she smiled genuinely. "You should do that more often," he said after one such smile. "Do what?" "Smile like you mean it, like you've forgotten to be afraid." Jane's expression sobered immediately. "I'm not afraid, aren't you?" The words were gentle, not challenging. She looked away. "We all have reasons for caution, Mr. Murphy." "Tom," he corrected. "After 2 days of meals together, I think you can call me Tom." A slight smile returned. "Tom, then, and I suppose you should call me Jane." "Jane," he repeated, liking the way it felt on his tongue. "I'd like to see you again, after California." Surprise flickered across her face. "You're coming back to Rawhide, in about 2 months. The drive should be done by then, and I'll be heading back this way." Hope and hesitation warred in her expression. 2 months is a long time, not so long in the scheme of things. Thomas leaned forward slightly. "Unless you're planning to move on." "No," she said after a moment. "No, I think Rawhide will suit me just fine." They finished their meal and walked slowly back toward Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. The night was cool, stars brilliant overhead, the street quieter now as most businesses closed for the evening. At the boarding house gate, Jane turned to face him. "Thank you for dinner and for everything else." "My pleasure." Thomas hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, Eddie Wilkins at the Broken Spoke Ranch knows how to reach me. He's a good man." Jane nodded. "I'll remember that." She extended her hand formally. "Safe travels to California, Tom." Instead of shaking it, Thomas raised her hand to his lips, brushing a gentle kiss across her knuckles. "Until I return, Jane." A blush spread across her cheeks, visible even in the dim light from the boarding house windows. For a moment, they stood connected, something unspoken passing between them. Then Jane withdrew her hand and hurried up the path, pausing at the door to look back once before disappearing inside. Thomas stood for a long moment, memorizing the image of her in the doorway. Then he turned and walked back toward the livery where his horse waited, his mind already calculating how quickly he could complete the drive to California and return to Rawhide. The next 2 months passed in a blur of dust, cattle, and endless miles. Thomas drove his men harder than usual, eager to reach their destination and conclude their business. Eddie noticed, but said nothing, understanding without being told that his boss's thoughts were often back in Rawhide. When they finally delivered the herd and collected their payment, Thomas surprised everyone by immediately planning the return journey instead of taking the customary week of rest in San Francisco. "Got somewhere important to be?" Eddie asked as they rode east. Thomas adjusted his hat against the setting sun. "Maybe," Eddie grinned. "Must be quite a lady." "I honestly don't know," Thomas admitted, "but I aim to find out." They made good time returning, pushing through long days in the saddle. As they approached Rawhide, Thomas felt an unfamiliar nervousness. What if Jane had left? What if she'd changed her mind about wanting to see him again? It was early evening when they rode into town, the streets busy with miners coming off shift and townspeople finishing their daily business. Thomas headed straight for the mercantile, Eddie trailing behind with amused interest. Jenkins looked up from his ledger as they entered. "Murphy, heard you made good time to California, looking for supplies already." "Actually," Thomas removed his hat, suddenly feeling awkward. "I was wondering if Miss Nichols was still working for you." Jenkins's expression shifted subtly. "She has been a godsend, that one. Organized my entire inventory system, increased profits by 15%. He hesitated. "She's not here, though. This is her half-day. Try the boarding house." Thomas nodded his thanks and turned to leave. "Murphy," Jenkins called after him. "She's had some trouble while you were gone. Nothing serious," he added quickly, seeing Thomas's alarm. "Just some fellow asking questions about her. Made her nervous. Might want to tread careful." Thomas's protective instincts flared. "What kind of questions? What fellow?" "Eastern type. Well-dressed. Said he was her cousin, looking to reconnect. She told Mrs. Holloway she has no cousins." Jenkins shrugged. "He left town after a few days. Haven't seen him since." Thomas exchanged a look with Eddie, who nodded slightly. "I'll check the saloon, see what I can learn," his foreman offered. "Thanks, Eddie." Thomas turned back to Jenkins. "Anything else I should know?" The shopkeeper considered. "She's well-liked, works hard, keeps to herself. Rented a small cabin on the edge of town last month, said the boarding house was too noisy." He gave directions, then added, "She's been teaching some of the miners' children to read in the evenings. Got quite a following." This detail made Thomas smile, imagining Jane surrounded by eager children. He thanked Jenkins again and headed for the cabin, his nervousness now mixed with concern. Who was looking for her, and why? The cabin sat on the western edge of town, a small, neat structure with a freshly swept porch and curtains in the windows. A thin curl of smoke rose from the chimney against the darkening sky. Thomas approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. Before he could knock, the door opened. Jane stood framed in the doorway, a book in one hand. She froze at the sight of him, her eyes widening. "Tom." "Hello, Jane." He removed his hat, suddenly uncertain. "I hope I'm not intruding." For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then the book tumbled from her fingers as she rushed forward, surprising them both by throwing her arms around him. Thomas embraced her instinctively, the feel of her in his arms both strange and somehow perfectly right. She pulled back almost immediately, composing herself with visible effort. "I'm sorry, that was improper. I just didn't expect." She stopped, color rising in her cheeks. "Would you like to come in?" The cabin's interior was spare but comfortable, a small table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the stone fireplace, a narrow bed in the corner with a colorful quilt. Books were stacked everywhere, some from the mercantile's limited selection, others clearly treasured possessions she'd brought with her. "It's not much," Jane said, watching him survey the space, "but it's private." "It's perfect," Thomas replied honestly. "Looks like you've settled in well." She smiled, more freely than he remembered. "I have, surprisingly. Rawhide has been good to me." She gestured to the table. "Would you like some coffee? I was just about to make some." They sat across from each other, the familiarity of 2 months ago returning quickly. Jane asked about California, and Thomas shared stories from the trail, making her laugh with tales of the cook's terrible biscuits and a young cowhand's first encounter with a grizzly. As they talked, he noted subtle changes in her. She seemed more relaxed, less guarded, though occasional shadows still passed behind her eyes. Her hands were slightly roughened now from work, and her skin had darkened from the Nevada sun. She'd made herself a home here, he realized, and the knowledge pleased him deeply. I heard someone was asking about you, he said finally, when there was a natural lull in the conversation. Jane's smile faded. News travels fast in small towns. Are you in trouble, Jane? She looked down at her hands. Not the kind you're thinking. Then what kind? Jane was silent for a long moment. When she looked up, there was resolve in her eyes. I was married, she said finally. In St. Louis, my husband was not a kind man. Thomas felt a cold anger begin to unfurl in his chest. Did he hurt you? Yes. The word was simple but laden with pain. In many ways, over many years. I finally left 6 months ago. I've been traveling west ever since, always afraid he'd find me. Is that who was looking for you? Your husband? She shook her head. His associate, a man named Harrington. My husband, William Northrop, is a banker with powerful connections. He doesn't do his own dirty work. Northrop, Thomas frowned. Not Jane Nichols, then. My maiden name, she explained. I thought it safer. Thomas absorbed this information, pieces falling into place: her fear, her caution, her desire for a new beginning. What happened with this Harrington fellow? He arrived about 3 weeks after you left. Started asking questions around town, claimed to be my cousin. Jane's hands tightened around her cup. Mrs. Holloway warned me. I avoided him, and eventually he gave up and left. But she looked up, her eyes haunted. I know William won't stop looking. Men like him don't accept defeat. You're safe here, Thomas said firmly. Rawhide looks after its own. Jane's smile was sad. I've been safe before. It never lasts. Thomas reached across the table, covering her hand with his. This time is different. I'm different. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Jane turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining. I thought about you, she admitted softly, while you were gone, more than I should have. I thought about you too, Thomas replied. Every day. They talked late into the night, Jane gradually revealing more of her past: her marriage at 18 to a man 20 years her senior. Chosen by her mother after her father's death left them nearly destitute. The early years that seemed promising, followed by increasing control and eventual violence as William's true nature revealed itself. Her desperate escape when she learned he planned to commit her to an asylum for hysteria after she confronted him about his affairs. I had a friend, she explained. Another teacher. She helped me get away, gave me money she'd saved. I don't know what happened to her after. I pray he didn't punish her for my sake. Thomas listened, his anger growing with each revelation, but he kept his voice gentle. You're very brave, Jane. She shook her head. Not brave, desperate. There's a difference. Sometimes they're the same thing. He squeezed her hand. It's late. I should go. Jane walked him to the door, hesitating before opening it. Will you call again? Try and stop me, he replied with a smile. I'm not going anywhere this time, not for a while at least. Relief washed across her face. I'm glad. He wanted to kiss her then, the urge nearly overwhelming, but he held back, sensing she wasn't ready. Instead, he touched her cheek gently, a promise in the gesture. Good night, Jane. Good night, Tom. Over the next few weeks, Thomas became a regular visitor at Jane's cabin. Sometimes they shared meals. Other times they simply talked or read companionably by the fire. He met her students, a motley group of children ranging from 5 to 15, and watched with admiration as she transformed their boisterous energy into genuine learning. Word spread that Thomas Murphy had essentially taken up residence in Rawhide, and speculation ran rampant about his relationship with the quiet schoolteacher. Neither confirmed nor denied the rumors, content to let their friendship develop at its own pace. Jane blossomed under Thomas's steady attention. She laughed more easily, ventured out more confidently, and gradually shared more of herself with him. In turn, Thomas found himself opening up about his own past, the war that had shattered his youth, the difficult years after, the solace he'd found in the open spaces of the West. One evening in late autumn, they walked along the creek that ran behind her cabin, enjoying the crisp air and the golden light of sunset on the cottonwoods. "I've been thinking," Thomas said as they paused on a small footbridge. "The broken spoke needs someone to keep the books, handle correspondence. Eddie's been after me to hire someone for years." Jane looked at him quizzically. "Are you offering me a job, in a manner of speaking?" He took a deep breath. "The ranch is 30 miles south. Good land, good water. I've built a decent house there. Tom, I'm not asking you to make any decisions now," he hurried on. "Just think about it. You'd have your own room, complete privacy, and if someday you wanted more than friendship, well." He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Jane was quiet for a long moment, watching the water flow beneath them. "I care for you," she finally said. "More than I thought possible, but I'm still married, Tom. In the eyes of the law, I belong to William." "You belong to no one but yourself," Thomas countered firmly. "As for the law, there are ways. Divorce is possible in Nevada, especially on grounds of cruelty." Hope flickered in her eyes, quickly replaced by fear. "If I file for divorce, he'll know where I am. He'll come for me." Thomas took her hands in his. "Let him come, I'll be waiting." Later that night, Thomas was awakened by a knock on his hotel room door. He opened it to find Eddie, expression grim. "Ryder just came in from Carson City," his foreman said without preamble. "Been asking about a woman matching Jane's description, showing a photograph, offering a reward." Thomas felt cold dread settle in his stomach. "William Northrop," Eddie nodded. "Said he's her husband, that she's mentally unstable and ran away from treatment. Sounds convincing from what I heard. He's staying at the Carson City Grand Hotel, but word is he'll be heading this way tomorrow." Thomas grabbed his shirt, mind racing. "Get the horses ready. We need to warn Jane." The night was cold and clear as they rode to Jane's cabin, stars hard as diamonds overhead. No light showed in her windows, but Thomas knocked anyway, urgently. She appeared moments later, wrapped in a shawl, hair loose around her shoulders. One look at his face told her everything. "He's coming," she whispered. "Tomorrow, most likely. We need to get you somewhere safe." Jane closed her eyes briefly. "There is nowhere safe, Tom, not from William." "The ranch," Thomas insisted. "It's remote, defensible. He won't find you there." She shook her head. "I'm tired of running, so tired." "Jane, no." Her voice was suddenly firm. "I've been running for 6 months. Every time I start to feel safe to build something, I have to leave it behind. I can't do it anymore." She straightened her shoulders. "I'll face him on my terms." Thomas stared at her, seeing the determination beneath her fear. "You don't have to face him alone." "I know." She reached for his hand. "That's why I think I can do it." They spent the night planning. Eddie rode back to town to alert Sheriff Davis, a taciturn but fair-minded man who had taken a liking to Jane. Thomas sent a messenger to Judge Wilson in Silver Creek, requesting an emergency hearing. By dawn, they had the outlines of a strategy. Jane insisted on continuing her normal routine. "If I hide, it only confirms his story that I'm unstable," she reasoned. "I need the town to see me as I am competent, calm." Thomas argued but eventually conceded, though he refused to leave her side. They walked to the Mercantile together, ignoring the curious glances of early risers. Jenkins, already informed of the situation, greeted them with grim solidarity. "Sheriff's posted men at the town limits," he reported quietly. "If Northrop shows, we'll know." The day passed with excruciating slowness. Jane worked methodically, helping customers, organizing inventory, occasionally catching Thomas's eye across the store. Her composure amazed him. though he could see the cost of it in the tightness around her mouth, the paleness of her knuckles when she gripped the counter. It was mid-afternoon when Sheriff Davis appeared at the mercantile door. "He's here," he said without preamble, "just rode in, heading for the hotel." Jane's face drained of color, but she nodded. "Thank you, Sheriff. Remember Miss Nichols or Mrs. Northrop. Whatever you prefer, you've broken no laws. He can't force you to go anywhere without your consent, not in my jurisdiction." "Unless he has commitment papers," Jane said quietly. Davis frowned. "He'd need a local doctor to verify your condition before those would be valid here. And Doc Miller thinks highly of you." Thomas moved to Jane's side, his hand finding the small of her back. "Are you ready?" She took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." They waited in Jenkins's back office, the sheriff positioned outside. Thomas wanted to take Jane directly to Judge Wilson, but she insisted on confronting William first. "I need him to see me," she explained, "to know that I'm not afraid anymore." The lie was evident in the trembling of her hands, but Thomas understood the need behind it. Some battles had to be faced head-on. They didn't wait long. Less than an hour later, the bell above the mercantile door jingled and Jenkins's voice carried clearly. "Can I help you, sir? I'm looking for my wife." The voice was cultured, authoritative. "Jane Northrop. I have reason to believe she's in this town." Thomas felt Jane stiffen beside him. Her eyes closed briefly, and when they opened, they were filled with a resolve that squeezed his heart. "Stay here," she whispered. "Jane, please. I need to do this part alone." Against every protective instinct, Thomas nodded. Jane squeezed his hand once, then stepped through the office door. From his position, Thomas could see into the store. William Northrop stood at the counter, a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. His silver-streaked dark hair was immaculately groomed, his posture commanding. He turned at Jane's entrance, and even from a distance, Thomas could see the flash of triumph in his eyes. "Jane." The word was spoken almost tenderly, belied by the hardness beneath. "My dear, I've been so worried." Jane remained near the door, her back straight. "Hello, William. You look well." Northrop took a step toward her. "Better than when you left. The fresh air agrees with you." "Freedom agrees with me," Jane replied, her voice steady. Northrop's smile tightened. "You're not well, Jane. You know that. These delusions of persecution. The doctors said it would get worse without treatment. The only delusion was believing you ever cared for me." Jane's hands were fisted in her skirts, but her voice didn't waver. "I'm not going back with you, William." His expression hardened. "Don't be foolish. You're my wife. Your place is with me." "My place is wherever I choose it to be." Jane took a deep breath. "I've filed for divorce. Judge Wilson in Silver Creek has granted a hearing tomorrow morning." Rage flashed across Northrop's face, quickly controlled. "On what grounds, pray tell?" "Cruelty." Jane's voice dropped slightly. "I have documentation. Letters from Dr. Reynolds about my injuries. Testimony from our housekeeper about your treatment of me. Lies and exaggerations." Northrop's voice remained calm, but Thomas could see the tension in his shoulders. "You were always prone to hysteria, my dear, making mountains of molehills. Was I making a mountain of the night you broke my wrist because dinner was cold?" Jane's voice rose slightly. "Or when you locked me in the cellar for 3 days for speaking to a male customer at the store? Or perhaps when you threatened to have me committed if I didn't provide you with a child, knowing full well the doctors said I couldn't carry one?" Each accusation hit like a physical blow. Thomas gripped the doorframe, restraining himself from rushing into the room. This was Jane's battle, he reminded himself. Her moment. Northrop glanced around, noting Jenkins's horrified expression and the sheriff's hard gaze. His charm resurfaced instantly. Jane has always had a vivid imagination. It's part of her illness. These fantasies, They're not fantasies. Jane stepped forward, pushing up her sleeve to reveal a jagged scar along her forearm. You did this with a letter opener when I asked about the perfume on your collar. She turned to the sheriff. I have more scars, Sheriff Davis. Some visible, some not. Northrop's facade cracked slightly. You ungrateful, he caught himself, smoothing his expression. Jane, please. Whatever grievances you think you have, we can discuss them privately, as husband and wife. There's nothing to discuss. Jane's voice was calm but firm. Our marriage is over. The hearing is tomorrow at 9. You're welcome to attend and contest it, but I should warn you Judge Wilson doesn't look kindly on men who beat their wives. Thomas could see the calculation in Northrop's eyes, the weighing of options. This is absurd. I have friends in Nevada, important friends. This backwater judge has been corresponding with the governor about domestic violence cases, Sheriff Davis interjected mildly. The governor's sister was killed by her husband last year. He's taken a personal interest. Northrop's confidence visibly faltered. He turned back to Jane, his voice lowering. You think this will end well for you? A woman alone with no money, no connections. How long before your friends here tire of your burdens? She's not alone. Thomas couldn't stay silent any longer. He stepped from the office, moving to Jane's side. And she never will be again. Northrop assessed him coldly. And who might you be, Thomas Murphy? I own the Broken Spoke Ranch south of here. Ah, Northrop's smile was venomous. I see. You found yourself a protector, Jane. How convenient for you both. Mr. Murphy is a friend, Jane said firmly. One of many I've made here, people who value me for myself, not as a possession. A friend? Northrop's laugh was ugly. Is that what they call it these days? Tell me, Mr. Murphy, are you enjoying my wife's friendship? Her talents in the bedroom are limited, I warn you, though perhaps you found ways to improve her education. Thomas moved forward, rage boiling in his veins, but Jane's hand on his arm stopped him. That's enough, William, she said, her voice icy. You've shown these good people exactly who you are. Nothing I could say would damn you more thoroughly than your own words. Northrop looked around, suddenly aware of his audience: Jenkins, the sheriff, and 2 customers who had entered during the confrontation, all watching with undisguised disgust. His composure slipped further. This isn't over, Jane, he hissed. You think you can humiliate me and walk away? I'll ruin you. I'll make sure everyone from here to Boston knows what kind of woman you really are. What kind is that, William? Jane asked quietly. A woman with the courage to leave, to build a new life, to face you without flinching. She shook her head. Say what you will. I'm not afraid of your words anymore. The sheriff stepped forward. I think you should leave now, Mr. Northrop. The hearing's at 9 tomorrow if you want to state your case legally. Otherwise, I suggest you head back to St. Louis. For a moment, it seemed Northrop might argue, but something in Davis's expression convinced him otherwise. This is a temporary setback, Jane, he said, adjusting his jacket. I'll see you in court. He stalked out, the bell jangling discordantly behind him. In the silence that followed, Jane remained standing, her face composed though her hands shook violently. Thomas gently led her to a chair, kneeling beside her. You did it, he said softly. You faced him. Yes, her voice was barely audible, but it's not over. He'll fight the divorce. He'll do anything to keep control. Sheriff Davis approached, his weathered face solemn. I'll keep an eye on him, Miss Nichols. Make sure he doesn't cause trouble before the hearing. Jenkins brought her a glass of water. That took courage, he said simply. More than most have. Jane accepted the water with a grateful nod, sipping slowly. Thomas watched her, concern and pride warring within him. She had stood her ground admirably, but the confrontation had clearly taken a toll. Let me take you home, he suggested gently. She nodded. allowing him to help her to her feet. They walked back to her cabin in silence, Jane leaning slightly against him as if drawing strength from his presence. Inside, she sank into the rocking chair, staring into the cold fireplace. "I never thought I could do that," she said finally. "Face him. Speak the truth aloud." Thomas knelt to build a fire, giving her time. "You were magnificent. I was terrified." A small, hollow laugh escaped her. "Still am. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid," he said, striking a match. "It means facing your fears anyway." The fire caught, flames dancing across the kindling. Jane watched them, her expression distant. "What if he wins tomorrow? What if the judge believes him instead of me?" "He won't." Thomas moved to sit opposite her. "But even if something goes wrong, I won't let him take you. We'll head to California, Oregon, even Canada if necessary." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "Why would you do that? Abandon your ranch, your life here for me?" "Because I love you," he said simply. The words had been building for months, and now they emerged without planning or pretext, bare and true. "I love your strength, your kindness, your resilience. I love the way you look at the world, even after everything you've endured. I love that you still believe in goodness." Tears filled Jane's eyes. "Tom, you don't have to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I'm not expecting I love you too." The words rushed out as if she'd held them back too long. "I think I have almost since the beginning, though I tried not to, tried to protect myself. But you—" She reached for his hand. "You made me feel safe again, not just physically safe, but safe to hope, to dream." Thomas brought her hand to his lips. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together, and every day after." That night, Thomas stayed at the cabin, sleeping in the rocking chair despite Jane's protests that he should take the bed. Neither wanted to be alone, yet both recognized the need for propriety, especially with the hearing looming. Sleep came fitfully to Jane. Twice she woke gasping from nightmares, William's face looming in her dreams. Each time, Thomas was there instantly, murmuring reassurances, his presence anchoring her back to safety. "I have night terrors from what they did," she confessed after the second episode, sitting wrapped in her quilt while Thomas stoked the fire. "Not just William, but the doctors too. The ones who examined me and declared me nervous and high-strung when I showed them my bruises. The lawyer who told me I had no recourse because a husband's authority was absolute." She shuddered. "Sometimes I dream they've locked me away and I'll never be free." Thomas crouched beside her. "You're free now," he promised. "And I'll wake you gently, every single time the nightmares come, for as long as you need." She touched his face, a gesture of such tenderness it made his heart ache. "I believe you." Morning arrived clear and cold, the sun casting long shadows across the cabin floor. They dressed in silence, Jane in her best dress, a simple navy blue with white collar, and Thomas in his one good suit, kept for business dealings in San Francisco. The ride to Silver Creek took an hour, the small town just stirring as they arrived. Sheriff Davis met them at the courthouse steps, his expression grim. "Northrop's already here," he reported, "with a lawyer from Carson City." Jane's grip on Thomas's arm tightened, but she nodded. "I expected as much." Inside, the courtroom was sparsely populated, a few curious locals. Eddie Wilkins representing the broken spoke, and William Northrop seated with a thin, sharp-faced man in an expensive suit. Northrop's eyes followed Jane as she walked down the aisle, a mixture of possessiveness and rage in his gaze. Judge Wilson entered, a white-haired man with penetrating blue eyes and a reputation for fairness. He surveyed the room briefly before taking his seat. "Divorce hearing, case of Nichols versus Northrop," he announced. "Though I understand Nichols is actually Mrs. Northrop's maiden name, which she has resumed using." He peered at Jane over his spectacles. "Is that correct, madam?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jane replied, her voice steady. "Very well. I've reviewed the petition filed yesterday. Serious allegations." He turned to Northrop. "The respondent is present with counsel." Northrop's lawyer stood. "Clarence Whitfield, representing William Northrop. We categorically deny the petitioner's claims and furthermore contend that she is not of sound mind to seek this dissolution." "Bold claim," Wilson remarked dryly. "Evidence." "Mr. Northrop has documentation from reputable physicians in St. Louis diagnosing his wife with nervous hysteria and recommending treatment." Whitfield presented several papers. "She fled this treatment, Your Honor, in a delusional state." Judge Wilson examined the papers. "I see." "And the petitioner's evidence of cruelty," Jane stood, surprisingly calm. "I have letters from Dr. James Reynolds, who treated injuries inflicted by my husband on multiple occasions." She presented her own documents. "Also a sworn statement from our housekeeper, Margaret Simmons, who witnessed Mr. Northrop's violence firsthand." The judge read through both sets of papers carefully, his expression giving nothing away. When he looked up, his gaze was sharp. "Mrs. Northrop, these injuries described by Dr. Reynolds, a broken wrist, 3 cracked ribs, numerous contusions, were they indeed inflicted by your husband?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Mr. Northrop, how do you respond to these allegations?" Northrop stood, the picture of dignified concern. "My wife is prone to accidents, Your Honor. Clumsy, especially when in her nervous states. I sought only to protect her, to get her the treatment she needed. By having her committed to an asylum," Wilson's tone was skeptical. "The doctors recommended it, for her own safety." The judge turned back to Jane. "Mrs. Northrop, do you have any witnesses to your character here in Nevada? People who can speak to your mental state since arriving?" "Several, Your Honor. Mr. Harold Jenkins, who employs me at the Mercantile. Mrs. Holloway, who rented me rooms. Sheriff Davis of Rawhide. And—" She hesitated briefly. "Mr. Thomas Murphy." Wilson nodded. "Let's hear from them." One by one, Jane's witnesses testified to her competence, her reliability, her gentle nature with children. Jenkins praised her business acumen, Mrs. Holloway her courtesy and tidiness, Sheriff Davis her law-abiding conduct. When Thomas's turn came, he spoke simply of her courage and dignity in the face of adversity. Throughout the testimonies, Northrop sat impassively, occasionally whispering to his lawyer. Only when Thomas spoke did his mask slip, revealing the anger beneath. When the witnesses finished, Wilson removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. "I've heard enough to make a determination," he announced. "The evidence of physical cruelty is substantial and corroborated. The claims of mental instability, however, are supported only by diagnoses that, frankly, appear motivated by the respondent's desire to control rather than treat." Northrop surged to his feet. "This is outrageous. She's my wife." "Sit down, Mr. Northrop," Wilson ordered sharply. "She is indeed your wife, but that gives you no right to abuse her." He replaced his spectacles. "The laws of Nevada are clear on this matter. Cruelty is grounds for divorce, and I find the petitioner has amply demonstrated such grounds." Jane's hand found Thomas's, squeezing tightly. "Furthermore," Wilson continued, "I find no evidence of mental incompetence that would preclude Mrs. Northrop from seeking this dissolution. Therefore, I grant the petition for divorce, effective immediately." He slammed his gavel. "Mrs. Nichols is hereby restored to her maiden name and released from all obligations of marriage to William Northrop." A small sound escaped Jane, something between a gasp and a sob. Thomas wrapped an arm around her shoulders, steadying her. Northrop's face contorted with rage. "This isn't the end," he spat. I have connections who won't help you here, Wilson interrupted coldly. And if you attempt to harass or threaten the former Mrs. Northrop, you'll find Nevada's laws on such matters equally clear and swiftly enforced. He turned to Jane. Mrs. Nichols, you are free to go. Good luck to you. They emerged from the courthouse into bright sunlight, Jane moving as if in a dream. It's over, she murmured. It's really over. Thomas guided her toward their waiting horses. It's over, he confirmed. You're free. Behind them, the courthouse door banged open. Northrop stalked out, his lawyer hurrying to keep pace. When he spotted Jane, he changed direction, moving toward them with purpose. Sheriff Davis intercepted him smoothly. That's far enough, Northrop. I want to speak to my wife. Ex-wife, Davis corrected. And she doesn't want to speak to you. Time for you to leave town. Northrop's gaze shifted to Thomas, hatred burning in his eyes. This is your doing. His hand moved toward his jacket. Several things happened at once. Davis reached for his pistol. Eddie Wilkins, standing nearby, stepped forward, and Thomas pushed Jane behind him, shielding her with his body. But it was Jane who spoke, her voice ringing clear in the sudden stillness. It's done, William. You've lost. If you have any dignity left, use it to walk away. Something in her tone, the absolute lack of fear, the finality seemed to penetrate Northrop's rage. He stared at her for a long moment, then at the men surrounding her protectively. Calculation replaced fury in his expression as he realized his position. This isn't over, he said again, but the words lacked conviction. Yes, it is, Jane replied simply. After a tense moment, Northrop turned away, stalking toward the hotel with his lawyer scurrying behind. Davis holstered his weapon. I'll make sure he leaves town, he promised. And I'll wire the sheriff in Carson City to watch him until he's on a train east. Thomas nodded gratefully. Thank you, Sheriff. The ride back to Rawhide was quiet, Jane absorbed in her thoughts, Thomas giving her the space she needed. When they reached her cabin, the sun was high overhead, bathing the little clearing in golden light. Would you like to be alone? Thomas asked as he helped her down from her horse. Jane shook her head. No, not now. She looked up at him, wonder in her eyes. I'm free, Tom. Truly free for the first time since I was 18. Yes, you are, he smiled down at her. The question is, what does Jane Nichols want to do with her freedom? She considered this, head tilted slightly. First, I think I'd like to be kissed by the man I love, if he's willing. Thomas's heart soared. He's very willing, he murmured, drawing her close. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and answer between them. The second was deeper, more certain, a promise exchanged without words. When they finally parted, both were breathless. I've wanted to do that for a very long time, Thomas admitted, resting his forehead against hers. So have I. Jane's smile was radiant. And now we can, whenever we wish. They spent the day together, talking, planning, simply enjoying their newfound freedom to be together openly. Thomas spoke of the ranch, of the life they could build there if she wanted. Jane shared her dreams of continuing to teach, perhaps starting a proper school someday. We could do both, Thomas suggested. The ranch house has plenty of room. And there are children nearby who could use proper schooling. Jane's eyes lit up at the possibility. You wouldn't mind having a school on your property. Our property, he corrected gently. And no, I wouldn't mind at all. As evening approached, Thomas reluctantly prepared to leave. I should let you rest, he said, though he was loath to part from her. Jane walked him to the door, then paused, her hand on his arm. Stay, she said softly. Not for that, not yet, but I don't want to be alone tonight, and I don't want to dream of him. Thomas searched her face, finding only certainty there. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. She squeezed his hand. I trust you, Tom, completely. That night they lay together in her narrow bed, fully clothed, Thomas's arms around Jane as she nestled against his chest. It was innocent yet profoundly intimate, a sharing of space and breath and warmth that transcended physical desire. "I never thought I could be this happy," Jane whispered into the darkness. "Never believed it was possible." Thomas pressed a kiss to her hair. "It's just the beginning," he promised. "Just the beginning of everything." When the nightmare came in the small hours before dawn, Jane woke with a stifled cry, her body rigid with remembered terror. Thomas woke her gently, his voice a low, soothing murmur in the darkness. "I'm here," he assured her. "You're safe. He can't hurt you anymore." Jane clung to him, trembling subsiding gradually as reality replaced the nightmare. "I hate that he still has this power," she whispered, "that he can still reach me in my dreams." "It will fade," Thomas promised. "And until it does, I'll be here. Every time, Jane. I'll wake you gently every single time." She raised her head to look at him in the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. "I believe you," she said again, with even deeper conviction than before. "I believe in us." 3 weeks later, they were married in Rawhide's small church, a simple ceremony witnessed by friends who had become family. Jane wore a new dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Thomas couldn't take his eyes off her, his heart so full he thought it might burst. Judge Wilson performed the ceremony, having come specifically from Silver Creek at Sheriff Davis's request. His words were traditional, but delivered with genuine warmth, an acknowledgement of the journey that had brought them to this point. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," he declared finally. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Thomas kissed his bride to the cheers of their friends, and in that moment the past seemed to fall away completely, leaving only the bright promise of their future. They moved to the ranch the following day, Jane marveling at the sprawling house Thomas had built years ago with a family in mind, a dream he'd almost abandoned before meeting her. He carried her across the threshold in the traditional manner, both of them laughing with the joy of new beginnings. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they came together as husband and wife, Thomas's gentleness and patience easing Jane's lingering fears. What began in tenderness ended in passion, a discovering of each other that left them both breathless and wondering. "I never knew it could be like this," Jane whispered afterward, curled against him in the big feather bed. "So beautiful." Thomas held her close, amazed by the gift of her trust, her love. "This is how it should always have been for you," he said softly. "This is what love truly means." The nightmares didn't disappear immediately. They came less frequently as weeks passed, but when they did, Thomas was always there, waking her with gentle words and tender touches, holding her until the fear subsided. Jane threw herself into creating a home and establishing her school, converting the ranch's unused bunkhouse into a classroom for the children of neighboring ranches and farms. Word of her teaching skills spread, and soon families were riding from miles around to give their children the education they otherwise would have missed. Thomas watched her flourish with pride and joy, amazed at the transformation from the frightened woman he'd first met to the confident teacher and loving wife who now shared his life. She still had moments of caution, still startled at sudden movements sometimes, but the shadows in her eyes were fading. Spring came, bringing new life to the land and news that delighted them both despite the doctor's previous dire predictions. Jane was expecting their child. "Are you happy?" Thomas asked, holding her close after she told him, concern mixing with his joy. The doctor in St. Louis was William's friend and said what William wanted to hear, Jane interrupted firmly. "The new doctor in Rawhide says I'm perfectly healthy and there's no reason to expect anything but a normal pregnancy." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. Our child, Tom. A new beginning. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. A new beginning, he echoed, overwhelmed by the miracle of it. The pregnancy progressed well, Jane glowing with health and happiness. She continued teaching until the last months, when Thomas insisted she rest more, bringing her books and papers instead of allowing her to make the daily journey to the schoolhouse. "You're fussing," she accused, though her smile took any sting from the words. "Protecting my family," he corrected, kissing her forehead. "My right as a husband, if I recall the ceremony correctly." Jane laughed, pulling him down beside her on the porch swing. "Your right and your privilege," she agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Though I'm hardly fragile." "You're the strongest person I know," Thomas said truthfully. "Doesn't mean I can't try to make things easier for you." They sat together as the sun set over their land, contentment surrounding them like a warm blanket. Neither could have imagined such peace 2 years earlier, Jane trapped in a nightmare of a marriage, Thomas resigned to a solitary life on the trail. "You ever think about him?" Thomas asked suddenly, the question escaping before he could reconsider it. Jane didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Less and less, though, he feels, distant now, like a character in someone else's story." Thomas nodded, relieved. The specter of William Northrop had faded from their lives completely after Sheriff Davis confirmed he had returned to St. Louis. There had been no further attempts at contact, no threats, no disturbances of their peace. "I think about what might have happened if I hadn't stopped in Rawhide that night," Thomas mused. "If I'd ridden straight through to California without a break." Jane took his hand, interlacing their fingers. "I don't believe we would have missed each other," she said simply. "Some things are meant to be, Tom. Some souls are meant to find each other no matter what." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, marveling at the wisdom and faith in her words. "I believe you're right," he murmured against her lips. "Some souls are meant to find each other." Their son was born in the early hours of a crisp autumn morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. Thomas paced outside the bedroom during the labor, deaf to Eddie's attempts at distraction, his entire being focused on the sounds from within Jane's determined efforts, the midwife's encouraging words. When the cry came, he froze mid-stride, heart pounding. Moments later the door opened and the midwife beckoned him in, her wrinkled face split with a broad smile. "A fine, healthy boy," she announced, "and your wife is doing wonderfully." Jane lay propped against pillows, her face flushed and radiant despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly as Thomas approached the bed. He sat carefully beside her, overcome with emotion as she placed the infant in his arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, revealed they were the same deep blue as Jane's. "He's perfect," Thomas whispered, a tear sliding down his cheek. "Absolutely perfect." They named him James Thomas Murphy after Jane's father and his own. Little Jamie, as they called him, thrived under the love of his parents and the doting attention of the entire ranch community. Eddie Wilkins appointed himself honorary uncle, bringing carved wooden toys and telling wildly inappropriate stories that Thomas pretended not to hear. As Jamie grew, Jane's nightmares became increasingly rare. When they did come, Thomas was always there, waking her gently, holding her close until the fear subsided. But now there was joy to replace the terror, their son sleeping peacefully in his cradle, their home warm and secure around them, their love a fortress against the shadows of the past. On Jamie's first birthday, they hosted a gathering for friends and neighbors, the ranch house filled with laughter and conversation. Jane moved through the crowd with confidence, her son on her hip, her smile bright and uninhibited. Watching her, Thomas felt his heart might burst with pride and love. Late that evening, after the guests had departed and Jamie was asleep, they sat together on the porch, a blanket wrapped around them against the autumn chill. "Happy?" Thomas asked, his arm around her shoulders. Jane leaned into him, her head resting in the familiar hollow of his shoulder. "Completely," she replied. "More than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nevada sky. After a while, Jane spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "You know, sometimes I think about that first night in Rawhide, how afraid I was, how certain that I would never be truly safe again." She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "You changed everything, Tom, not just by protecting me, but by believing in me. By showing me I was worthy of love." Thomas cradled her face in his hands. "You were always worthy," he said softly. "Always strong, always remarkable. I just had the great good fortune to be the man who found you." "We found each other," Jane corrected gently. "Two souls meant to meet, remember?" "I remember." He kissed her, a kiss full of gratitude and promise. "And I thank God for it every day." Inside the house, Jamie made a small sound in his sleep. Both parents listened, smiles exchanged in the darkness when he settled again without waking. "Our son will never know fear like I did," Jane murmured, determination in her voice. "He'll grow up knowing only love and security." "And adventure," Thomas added, "and books, thanks to his mother, and horses, thanks to his father." "And the value of kindness," Jane continued. "The importance of helping others who need it." Thomas nodded, thinking of the frightened young woman he'd approached on a dusty street 2 years earlier. Sometimes the smallest kindnesses change everything. Later, as they prepared for bed, Jane paused at the window, looking out at the moonlit landscape of their ranch, the silver-washed corrals, the shadowy outlines of barn and bunkhouse, the distant mountains like guardians on the horizon. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she said, echoing words she'd spoken on their first night together. "Never believed life could be this good." Thomas wrapped his arms around her from behind, drawing her against his chest. "This is just the beginning," he promised, repeating his own words from that night. "Just the beginning of everything." And it was. The years that followed brought more children, a daughter 2 years after Jamie, then twin boys who completed their family, more happiness, more growth. Jane's school expanded, eventually becoming Broken Spoke Academy, with a proper building and additional teachers. Thomas's ranch prospered, becoming one of the most respected operations in Nevada. They faced challenges together: drought years, economic downturns, childhood illnesses, but always as partners, their love deepening with each obstacle overcome. The nightmares faded completely over time, replaced by dreams of the future, of their children's lives, of growing old together in the home they had built. And on the rare occasions when shadows of the past did return in the dark hours before dawn, Thomas was always there, waking her gently with whispered words of love, holding her close until morning broke across the eastern sky, bringing with it the promise of another day together in the life they had created from courage and kindness and love that had conquered fear.